Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we'll welcome back Kathleen Muldoon, coach and medical educator. Today's Kevin MD article is Why ChatGPT Can't Write Your Residency Personal Statement. Kathleen, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So I think last time we talked about the residency personal statement. So this one was another story regarding that. So tell me what happened here.
So this piece came to me because a student who is getting ready to submit her residency application had been working with me in one of my personal statement writing workshops and just had written this just absolutely gorgeous piece where she developed this very strong narrative arc about her journey into palliative care medicine and made meaning of all of the observations that she had collected along her time on rotations, and just a really wonderful, strong personal statement. And she read it or offered it to a resident for some feedback on one of her rotations that she was on. And he basically, the response was, it's good, but why didn't you just use ChatGPT to write it?
The resident said that.
The resident said that.
Okay.
And so I think what she came back to me to kind of help process that comment, because what she heard was, you wasted your time writing this and it wasn't very efficient to do the writing. And it just, I think in this age where we're all struggling about how AI is forcing its way into our processes and into medical education, this piece came out of that and really trying to understand what is the point of the personal essay, part of the residency application process, and that, in my opinion, spending time reflecting on who you are and how to make meaning out of those moments that stood out to you in parts of your training is never wasted time, and also not something that can be outsourced to an algorithm.
There's a certain amount of irony here because that resident, of course, has completed medical school and got accepted to a residency, yet that resident felt that generative AI could replace the reflection needed for a personal statement. This is someone that is, of course, applying to residency.
Yes, the irony is rich, and also that statement could belie just everyone grappling with how do we use this and how do we not use it, right? And so there could be a lot that is lost in the context of where that comment came from, but the way that it landed with this student, I think, also speaks to something that comes out in the process of reflecting on who you are and where you want to land in medicine in terms of the next step of your training. And someone who notices, someone who wants to be their true authentic self, like, those are not necessarily things that are promoted during medical education. And so it speaks, like, the way that it landed, with this person who's about to lay their whole, everything out on the table. We've talked about this before, to an algorithm that makes a match that determines, like, how you're going to continue your career in medicine, can feel devastating. So I thought it was worth reflecting on.
So, as much as you can, tell us about some of the conversations you had with this prospective resident, and how did you help this resident process that comment about, it's almost dismissive, like, why didn't you use ChatGPT to write this, after, like you said, she laid out all her cards on the table? How did you process that with her?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of value in talking about things in workshop formats, and hearing, not only giving voice to your thoughts and fears and opinions on things, but also hearing back how it lands, right? Because then it gives you the opportunity to say, like, does this sound like me? Is what I'm saying reflected back to me from what other people say, how I want to be perceived? Or is that, because we can't always control how the words that we use land, right? Because everyone's bringing their own narrative and experiences to it. So what we spent some time doing was kind of unpacking why, like, what she had learned through the process of writing, of, in these workshops that I run, we read out parts of our pieces, and I ask the question, does this sound like you? Are you proud of this? is the meaning that other people are reflecting back to you about that moment, is that, changing anything about your interpretation? Is it not the interpretation that you want people to have? So all of these kind of moments, which take time and take reflection, are things we work through. And, was that a valuable part of your process? Because, I think that it's easy to think about the personal statement as a writing assignment, like a box you have to check when you're submitting your application, because you do. But in my mind, the product isn't the essay. The product is understanding the person you are,
Hmm.
uh, in the process of writing that, and the doctor that you want to be. And so, just asking her in that moment, in this like coaching moment that we had, is that time that you regret? Is that time that you learn something, and how are you going to bring that forward? And, kind of working through that with her, we were able to come to the understanding that she's very proud of this piece of work. It is a true reflection of who she is. And it also answers the question that will come up when you're in the interview process of the application cycle. Is this someone I want on my team at 2 a.m.?
Hmm.
Is this someone that I can spend the next few years of training with? Which, AI doesn't necessarily pick up on that nuance for you. Only you can make that meaning.
Absolutely. So the journey of writing the personal statement itself, of course, is so much more valuable than the actual product, like you said, that comes out. Now, you've talked to a lot of medical schools as they've gone through, of course, your workshop. Just give us a sampling of some of the surprising things that they may have learned about themselves during that whole personal statement process.
Yeah, so I usually run the workshops in 4 weeks, increments. And so, you don't come in with a polished draft. We're not editing out the dots and commas and em dashes and all the things that have kind of come up as markers of something that, AI wrote. Instead, it's, what's a memorable moment for you?
Hmm.
And even taking several, right? Okay, now write 5. Now write a little more detail about that. What makes it memorable for you? And going through a process of, well, what's the defining similarity between these moments that stand out to you? It's not just the pattern of noticing, but it's also going back to what you noticed and understanding, wow, what's really coming up for me here is that team making is really something that's important to me, and why I want it to be part of a really strong emergency medicine residency program. Or, you know, a second thing that's always surprising to students is that they think they need to be really impressive on the page. And I'm, and I was like, well, those things will come out on your CV, and all of the, kind of impressive things like your, all of that kind of stuff. What I think that the personal statement gives you space to do is those smaller moments. Can you make meaning of them?
Hmm.
Like when you are the student, because these are just students, right? Sitting in the room with somebody whose treatment plan is not going as they wanted or as their family wanted, but you're the person that sits there and does have the time that you may not always have to sit with the patient and hear what matters to them, then what you are experiencing is, your core value in knowing, you wanting to develop that ability to ask the questions that allow the patient to tell you their deepest fears, their most vulnerable moments, or, why something is so hard for them. And it may not be just the diagnosis, right? It
Hmm.
might be a lot of other things. And so what's surprising to them, actually, I think, is that it doesn't have to be the most impressive, glossy, polished language moments. It's, can you make meaning of those things that stick out in your memory, which is that self-reflective process.
Now, I'm going to assume that you've read many, many, many personal statements. How
Yeah,
confident are you to detect something or a paragraph or a sentence is written by AI versus not AI?
I'm pretty confident. And it's not just the polished language and some of the grammatical cues that tend to have been picked up by AI, but it's a lack of, especially in conversation with the students, of their ability to flesh out those moments and why they matter, how they relate to their journey, how they relate to the kind of practice that they want to end up in. And so because these large language models, they are trained on vast amounts of data, and their purpose is to predict the next best word, right? So it becomes out polished, it comes out, I love Margaret Atwood, a Canadian author, calls it the great blanding, right? Because it tends to make you average. And so what gets lost is the distinctive voice, the odd moments, the, kind of the sharp edges. Those things tend to get polished out in a statement that's written by generative AI because it's not something that an algorithm can make sense of. It's not something that follows the predict pattern. And the large language models are getting better, but I've noticed that I can still sense when it is just averaging out those parts that I think students are afraid to include because they seem a little bit out there. But I do, stand firm, especially after talking to many residency directors and the people who are reading these statements, especially now that so many are getting averaged out, that the ones that stand out are the ones that feel human, that feel real, and that the students who are applying can speak about honestly and authentically in conversation.
Is there a role for AI at all? Not necessarily with the final writing process, but in terms of fleshing out ideas, perhaps even giving ideas, fleshing out stories, anything in the planning process. Is there a role for AI?
I don't think this is a question of is AI good or bad. And students who are using AI and residency programs, some of them are using them to screen out, right, applicants. And so, in some ways, maybe what we'll see is it's kind of an arms race of AI responding to AI. But I do think for students who feel completely lost, I do think the first step is to just brainstorm, but maybe you need a prompt, maybe you need some reflective process back of like, what is coming out here from this for me. I provide that in workshops and in human forms, and not just me, but like a group of us, right? And I think that's important, but maybe there is a role for AI to be like, make sense of this. Just don't hand over the whole process. And I'm not going to shame a student that is. I mean, there is a diverse number of students that English is not their first language, that have disabilities involved, and AI can be a great tool for a first step. Just don't polish out the parts of yourself that AI may tend to bland away.
So that actually would lead me to my next question. Like you said, where English isn't their first language, or foreign trained students, for instance,
Mhm.
I've seen arguments that AI levels the playing field for them. So is that a legitimate argument?
So I've heard a couple of things, right? I've heard that that some of the algorithms that are used to detect AI differentially pick up people who have used it for whom English is not their first language.
Mhm.
So I think the evidence shows it can go both ways. It can be helpful, but these like detective algorithms, or even some that are used in the screening process, tend to pick out turns of phrases as being generative AI and maybe putting into a different pile, or differentially affect people who are coming to the process through, from diverse backgrounds. And so I think there's an evolving body of literature on that. I do always caution, especially for people in the audience listening to this, people who use algorithms to screen out applicants, that those algorithms are sometimes not, they're just not very good, and they're evolving. And just be aware that there's a caveat on those processes.
So do you think that there will be a time where AI is so powerful that it could really seamlessly replicate human writing, especially when it comes to personal statements? Because the growth is so exponential. The latest models, they had to be banned by the government and regulated. And I'm going to feel that there's going to be a point relatively soon where it's going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to suss out AI writing.
Yes, I think that's probably true, right? And what remains is not, is AI good or bad, or should we be using it, but what are you losing
Hmm.
when you outsource those human parts of medicine? Like, so for example, It could get that far to like mimic human voice and maybe your own personal human voice, and maybe you train it in that way. And in doing so, are you still outsourcing that reflective process that allows you to understand your why, that prevents you? I mean, I see it as kind of a protective factor, right? That, if you pretend to be somebody else and end up in a program that's not a good fit for you, or something that you never really processed or thought hard about, is this really what I want, which comes out in that reflective process. I see those physicians also, if not even that long into their careers, like burning out, like wondering like if, why this doesn't match their why. So it could be that the process does get that far, but if you're not practicing understanding your own authentic voice, you lose that part of knowing who you are. And I would say that then you lose that part that can recognize who your patients are
Mhm.
and be present for them, who will not have AI as a shield on their worst day, on the time when you're talking to them, on their kind of rough language around, why something is so upsetting for them, or describing their symptoms, right? So again, I kind of come back to this idea, like it probably is happening, right? And it probably is like this arms race, but that human to human connection is what makes humanity and medicine, what differentiates it as an art, and not just, entering your symptoms into the algorithm and getting a diagnosis back.
We're talking to Kathleen Muldoon, coach and medical educator. Today's Kevin MD article is Why ChatGPT Can't Write Your Residency Personal Statement. Kathleen, as always, let's end with your take home messages to the Kevin MD audience.
My take home message for the clinicians in your audience is, I don't think the question is, did AI write this statement? It's more, who is the person in this writing? And does that person come through? And are you making it safe for them to come through, as you're going through these applicants and the process? And so, as AI becomes more and more skilled at representing human voice, just remember to look for the person behind the writing.
Kathleen, thank you again for sharing your perspective and insight. Thanks for coming back on the show.
I really appreciate your time.